Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Committee of the Whole for Wednesday, March 26th, 2025. We have a specific agenda on for today, so I'll call the meeting to order at 9:01 a.m. Item number 2 is approval of the agenda. Can I get a mover and a seconder for the agenda? Moved by Councillor Allen, seconded by Councillor Allwood. Any questions or comments on the agenda? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? That is carried. Item number 3 is our declaration of pecuniary interest. As always, if one arises, we know what to do. Item number 4 is items for information. 4.1 is the motion that got us to our Committee of the Whole here today. It shows there the resolution that was passed on November 6th, 2024, meeting of council, and shows kind of the reason for being here today, that council approved education in regards to options for septic reinspection program with pilot project of voluntary septic reinspection for all properties in Grey Highlands and mandatory inspections for lakefront properties, and that staff bring forward this, to a future Committee of the Whole meeting for discussion education. And I believe that our CBO Holt is in attendance to give a presentation. Or is that going to be for item 4.2? Clerk van Alstein.
Through you, Deputy Mayor Nielsen, I think it can go in whichever order you wish, but I think before the discussion starts, the presentation would probably be helpful for council.
That makes a whole lot of sense. So there really is no motion for item 4.1. It's just there for information. So then we'll just go to item 4.2, and then we'll look for CBO Holt to give our presentation.
Good morning, all. Thank you very much for having us today. I would like to introduce my guest today, Anne Egan. She is an engineer with RJ Burnside with 20 years experience. She's developed a reputation as one of the foremost on-site wastewater specialists in Ontario. She has led projects for both private and municipalities, and Anne has dedicated septics, has designed septics within Grey Highlands sites that prove challenging, and I'm thankful that she's here for the discussion in regards to septic reinspection in Grey Highlands. I'd also like to introduce Mac Taylor. Mac Taylor started his career in 1966, and he is an experienced septic designer and has installed over 2,000 septics in his 55-year career. He is well respected in the industry, and I'm happy to have him as well here in the conversation of septic reinspection. Thank you. So you have a copy of our of Anne's report. I reached out to Anne in regards to bringing options for septic reinspection, and we have a PowerPoint that I think Danielle is going to assist us with to walk us through the steps, and hopefully we'll be able to have a good conversation. Just for clarity, through you, Chair, could you do you want us to do the full report and then have conversation later, or do you want us to guide us through conversations throughout the report presentation?
If we're doing a PowerPoint presentation, then I would say if there's questions that come up throughout, members may raise their hands, because sometimes it's easier to remember your question if you're on a certain slide or certain topic, if that's okay with our presenter, and then we can continue the conversation once the presentation is over.
Okay, sounds good. So would you like to start, Anne? You comfortable with that?
Sure.
Perfect. All righty.
Do you want to go over the legal stuff first?
Yeah, I think the legal main concepts.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. We have a bit of an overview of a report that I had provided to Ms. Holt, and I believe that's been circulated to Council for information, just to provide. There's a lot of different options and ways to do a reinspection program. So the goal of that report was to arm you with information to help you make decisions on the right kind of program that would work for Grey Highlands. So the presentation today is really just walking through that document, kind of hitting the high notes, and certainly there's lots of opportunity for discussion as we go through. Okay, can you advance the slide, please? So just the main concepts that are in the report and in this presentation is going over the legal framework that sets out the ability for a municipality to establish a reinspection program. And there's also been quite a lot of research and studies done of other municipalities who have implemented those kinds of programs. You know, everybody puts their own spin on it. There is no one size fits all. There's no prescribed way to do a reinspection program. So lots of information is available out there about what has worked in one area and different things that different municipalities have tried. So there's a lot of good information that we can draw from to develop a program here in Grey Highlands. And then because there is no one size fits all way to do a reinspection program, there's a lot of different options in terms of the scope, how you administer the program, communicating information with the public about the program, and the documentation side of things, and of course the cost of the program. What is it going to cost and how is that going to be covered? So that's the kind of the outline of the report that we've provided. And next slide, please. So there is a legal framework in place. The Building Code and the Building Code Act do set out the ability for municipalities to implement reinspection programs. You have the ability to pass bylaws to govern and implement either a mandatory or a discretionary reinspection program. And as I said a moment ago, a lot of municipalities have already implemented those kinds of programs. So there's a lot of examples and a wealth of knowledge out there that we can draw from. There's also been a number of studies, a particular one that I have referenced in my report, and I was involved in the steering committee on this study as a representative of the Ontario On-Site Wastewater Association. So this is the FOCA, Federation of Ontario Cottagers Association report from 2019. And that was a study that looked at the different programs that have been implemented and, you know, lessons learned, what's worked, what has not worked. And it summarizes a lot of really good case studies in that report. So that's a really good source of information. Next slide, please. So some of those lessons learned from that 2019 FOCA study, public outreach is very important. Obviously, you need your residents to understand the program. What is it? Why are we doing it? And how's it going to work? And the need for some sort of municipal oversight and a structured program, or do you run it as a voluntary program? There are different ways to do it. Different things work in different places. A lot of municipalities have found that in their database, their inventory of older systems can be very limited. It's, you know, there are a lot of systems, sewage systems out there that have been in the ground for, you know, decades, and there's been a lot of regulatory change over the years as to who's governing those regulations. So, you know, it went from the Ministry of Environment through the health units to the municipalities. And in some cases, there just are not historical records. So sometimes it can be a challenge to even identify how many systems you have and where they're located. So that's certainly one of the benefits of the programs is the ability to assemble that information. Some of the other lessons learned, you may expect that there will be some opposing viewpoints. Not everyone necessarily is behind it and supportive of a reinspection program. Can never please everyone. That's just reality, but do our best to come up with a program that works for the residents of your municipality. And certainly you can use the existing program structures that are out there that have been established by other municipalities to learn from those. And, you know, you can take the pieces of those that work for this municipality and build your own customized program for Grey Highlands. And next slide, please. Some of the focus study also identifies some of the program benefits. So the municipalities that have implemented reinspection programs have identified what the benefits of those programs are, and they have seen firsthand some of those benefits. So one of the things is that the program can protect a resident's property value. A sewage system is like any other system with your house, your roof, your furnace. It needs to be looked after, and there's preventative maintenance that needs to happen, and doing so protects that investment. So, you know, a sewage system can be very expensive to replace, and those reinspection programs have really brought a benefit to help the homeowner understand the value of that investment and the value of that preventative maintenance to protect that investment and their property value. The program also has the benefit of protecting environmental resources. So surface water and groundwater can be impacted by malfunctioning sewage systems, and those are shared resources. It's in everyone's best interest to protect those resources. And then, as I noted a moment ago, sometimes older systems aren't well documented. So doing that reinspection program, one of the benefits is that you start to build a more comprehensive database of the records for your municipality. And then, you know, when you come back to revisit those in a number of years, if you do a multi-year program, you've already got that established. So the initial groundwork, sometimes it's a little bit of work to build that initial database, but then you'll have a much more comprehensive inventory of exactly what is in the ground, how long has it been in the ground, and it makes it a lot easier to follow up in the future. And one of the biggest benefits of these reinspection programs, I think probably every other municipality that was surveyed as part of the case studies in the FOCA report, is the public awareness piece and the public education aspects. There's huge benefits of just getting out there and talking to homeowners and helping them understand their system. You know, not everyone is as geekly enthusiastic about sewage systems as some of us. And, you know, the average homeowner, it's buried in the ground and they don't necessarily think about it. So that touch point with the owner to help them understand why it's so important to do that preventative maintenance and keep on top of your system to make sure that it's working. That's a really huge, important part of these programs, is just that connection with the public. Next slide, please. So there is no one-size-fits-all way to do these programs, and there's a number of different options that you can consider, and you can tailor it to meet your needs and your objectives in the municipality here. So some of the things that might vary would be the scope of the inspection. You know, is it just a visual inspection? Is it more intrusive? Do you open the tank? Do you not open the tank? Do you have the tank pumped by the owner? Like, there's a number of different variations of exactly how far you go with the inspection. And certainly in my written report, I get into a little bit more of the sort of the details of that. I think I do have another slide on that in a couple minutes. So I'll talk a little bit more about some of those options. And there's also the scale of the program. How do you identify which properties are going to be inspected? Are there priority areas such as waterfront that are focus areas, or do you do every sewage system in the municipality? So for example, the Township of Tiny, they inspect every system, waterfront, non-waterfront. Everybody gets inspected on about a 6-year rotation. So that's their program. Other municipalities focus more on vulnerable areas like waterfront lots. So it's really up to the municipality what the focus of your program will be. And how do you prioritize those? And what's the timeline? Do you want to have everything done in a year or two, or do you spread it over a longer time? Is it a multi-year program, and you're coming back, 5 years from now to re-inspect those ones? So I have to give some thought to the structure of the program in terms of scale and prioritizing.
And I'm just going to pause you there.
Yes.
I think Councillor Allen has a question.
Thank you. I just wondered if size of the property has any bearing as to whether we should or want to inspect.
That is a good question. I think certainly smaller lots would perhaps lend themselves to potentially having more issues, but it's quite site specific in terms of, the site conditions and the soils, whether a smaller lot is perhaps more vulnerable. I think from my viewpoint, perhaps the age of the system is more critical than size.
If we're worrying about it leaching into the groundwater, I guess it doesn't matter what size the property is. So, okay, thank you.
Okay. So some of the other options and sort of the framework for the program has to consider the administration aspects and the staffing. Some municipalities run it through their own building department. They hire temporary inspectors to do it. Others contract it out to consultants such as Burnside or others to run those programs. It may be a hybrid of those things. You really have to just come up with a plan that works for your municipality. And certainly the public awareness aspects, I mentioned that's one of the important key benefits of these programs. So some thought in advance to how you're going to communicate with the public. What information do they need about the program? Do you do an open house information session to bring awareness to people? And certainly your website is going to be a key way to communicate with your owners in the township. But you want to have as much communication with them to get the buy-in about the program and why it's a good thing to be doing. And then certainly there's the documentation piece, having some database or way to gather that information and those records and manage all of that inspection information and the follow-up that happens with that. What happens if there's a deficiency? What's the process to document addressing those deficiencies? And then the cost piece. How is the program going to be funded? So the cost of the program is quite dependent on some of these other options that I've just walked through briefly. That's going to determine the level of effort and the amount of time and the cost that goes into those inspections. And then the township would need to come up with a model to cover those costs and how that's going to be done. And there's different ways to do it. Different municipalities have used different financial mechanisms to do that. Advance the slide, please. So one of the variables is the scope of the inspection. There really is no prescribed minimum standard that you have to do for a reinspection. It might vary from how less intrusive to more intrusive. There's a number of different things to consider. So the typical elements would be to do an initial desktop review all the permit records, gather as much information as you can, and then you would have a site inspection. So then the question becomes, what does the inspector do and how far do they take that inspection? It could be as simple as a visual, sort of look at everything, identify where the components are on the property. Most programs have found that there's a benefit to somewhat of a hybrid program where it's not only just a visual, but it usually looking in the septic tank is a huge indicator of system function. So a lot of programs have found that having the tank accessible and taking a look in the tank as part of the inspection affords a really good look at the system. So as an example, if the water level in the tank is higher than it's supposed to be, it's a good indicator that the leaching bed might have a blockage or perhaps it's saturated and is not properly treating and functioning. So that's a good indicator without going and digging into the leaching bed to look at the conditions in the soil, which is far more intrusive, and we can talk about the risks with doing that type of approach. But certainly looking in the tank is a really good way to get an indication of the system. And, you know, if the water level in the tank is low, it might have a leak. There's a certain operating water level, and if it's not at that level, then you would start to look for cracks or leaks in the tank. So a lot of programs have found that looking into the tank, so sort of somewhat intrusive in terms of having to dig up the tank lid and get a look in it, but not intrusively, no excavation or digging into the bed. Certainly the liability and the risk of damaging, utility locates would have to be done, and there's just a lot more risk to doing a more intrusive look into buried components than the benefit that you would gain. So the goal of the reinspection program is to look for obvious signs of problems that would manifest themselves sort of as something you could see. The goal is not to do a fully intrusive, detailed condition assessment of every buried component. It's just not sort of reasonable within the scope of a reinspection, but it may be that as a result of the reinspection program, an owner may have to do further work because a problem was flagged as something that may need some follow-up action. And maybe just a note on systems, and they all have a finite life, and the life of a sewage system really can vary depending on how it was built and how it was used over the years. But most of these systems, they gradually fail over a long period of time. It's not like by the time it's spectacularly failing and you see effluent on the ground, or like it's been gradually, progressively failing for quite an amount of time at that point. So one of the things, the benefits with these reinspection programs is that it enables you to catch those things as they're progressing and not wait for the full failure of the system. The reality is by the time you see evidence at the ground surface or your tank is backing up, that system has probably been vulnerable for quite a number of years and not necessarily providing the right treatment for quite a while. So the reinspection programs have been able to more proactively identify issues with systems before they become a full failure of the system and have to be rectified. Next slide, please. So just further on the inspection scope, some of the typical observations that would get documented while the inspector is on site. They would look at the setbacks. So is the sewage system set back properly from a well, surface water features, property lines? Those setbacks are specified in the Ontario Building Code. So the report would document whether the system complies with those setbacks or not. It would gather information about the dwelling, so how many bedrooms, and that ties to how large the sewage system is supposed to be for that dwelling. And then, looking into the tank, as I mentioned, is a really good way to capture a lot of information with sort of minimal disruption to the system. So having the tank open and accessible, and looking in the tank and documenting the condition of the tank, and just the functional aspects of it that you can see through the access openings. Typically, the inspection will also measure the accumulated sludge in the tank and advise the owner if it's time to pump out the tank. Some programs will have built into their program a requirement for the owner to have the tank pumped as part of the inspection. My experience, my recommendation would be not to have the tank pumped prior to doing that inspection because of the value in seeing the tank in its normal operating condition. But as part of the inspection, if the sludge level has accumulated to the point where it needs to be pumped out, then that would be a follow-up action that the inspection report would identify to the homeowner that it's time to pump out your tank, the sludge is accumulating, time to remove those solids. And part of that communication with the owner is helping them understand why it's important to pump out the tank when those solids reach a certain level. It's protection for the bed. We want to keep the solids out of the bed because solids in the bed equals clogging, and it shortens the life of the bed. So a simple pump out can really lengthen the life of the system as a whole by protecting the bed itself. So. And then just a visual inspection of the leaching bed area. Sometimes it's not always possible to know exactly where the bed is on a property. Certainly the initial desktop review, if there's a drawing, it would give the inspector an idea where things are on the property, or the homeowner may know it's over here somewhere. But sometimes older systems without records, you don't know exactly where it is. So that can be a little bit of a challenge, but certainly the only way to really know exactly where the buried piping is would be to excavate, and that's not really recommended as part of these inspections. So in some cases, it may be sort of a high-level visual inspection that there's no obvious signs of issues. You know, if there was effluent coming to the ground surface or soft, squishy areas on the surface of the grass, that would be an indicator that there might be something wrong with the bed. But generally, those are the kinds of observations that the inspectors are looking for and documenting. And they would also just have a look around the yard in general and look at surface drainage, roof drainage. You know, do they have their eaves troughs, downspouts outletting onto the top of the bed? That's maybe not the best situation. You want to direct drainage away from the bed so that it doesn't have any more hydraulic load than it needs to deal with from the actual sewage itself. So those are the kinds of things that would typically be documented in the inspection report. Next slide, please. So one of the things that needs to be thought of when establishing a program is to identify how you're going to inspect and which areas of your municipality prioritize certain areas, or are you going to look at everything? So there need to be some thought to a bit of a risk assessment. So you might look at systems that are older, you know, things from the 70s, 80s. There's lots of those out there, and some of those are probably nearing the end of their life, if not already. So those might need to be a priority. Certainly environmentally sensitive areas, like such as Lake Eugenia or the other lakes and rivers in your township, you might be choosing to prioritize those areas given the environmental sensitivity. And also areas where there's no permit record for that particular lot, that should be prioritized for an inspection so that you can obtain a record of what services are on that lot. If there's a record of complaints on a particular property, that's probably a reason to look at inspecting and capturing those properties in the program. One of the things that some municipalities have considered is looking at exceptions where if a system is newly installed, perhaps it might be exempt from the program if it's less than a certain age. Or in some cases, sewage systems that have a treatment unit, the owner is required under the code to have a maintenance contract for that treatment unit. So that owner is having someone come on an annual basis to look at the treatment unit itself, take a sample, make sure that the treatment unit is still performing. So some municipalities will outline an exception for those kinds of systems because they're already having someone come and look at their system. I would say that the argument on the other side of that would be that the scope of what those maintenance providers look at can vary quite a bit. And some of them they're really just looking at the treatment unit itself. Is the air blower working or any alarms going off? They don't necessarily look at the other aspects of the system, like the bed and the drainage. Those kinds of things are also very important to the system as a whole. The treatment unit is just one component of it. The leaching bed is just as important to the system as a whole. So I would perhaps caution against accepting systems when just because they have a treatment unit. There's still benefit in looking at the system. And the objective of the reinspection program is a little bit different than the objective of what that maintenance provider is doing on an annual basis. So that would be something that needs to be discussed and communicated with the owners, that it's kind of a different type of inspection that's being done, a different objective, a different outcome. And I can say just from some of the other programs that have been done, they do find that even systems with treatment units, there's a benefit to the program, the reinspection program, because sometimes they need to remind the owners that they're required to have that contract for service and have their treatment unit looked at on an annual basis. That is a building code regulation that the owner is legally obligated to do that, but sometimes people need reminders. And the reinspection programs have been a good way to have that connection with the owners for that reminder.
I have a question.
Yep,
Mr. Chair.
I believe we, go ahead, Mayor McQueen.
Okay, thank you. So I was going to wait to the end, but you sort of systems that need me. Are you talking about the peat moss type systems that, like, we're talking about up to class 4 systems? So are you talking peat moss, that the ones that you are in a more of a constrained area, but they have to be regulated, followed after a certain time, they have to be replaced?
Yes, so that would be one example of a type of treatment unit. So, conventional systems, your septic tank and your leaching bed, very simple, very passive. In some cases with smaller lots or difficult lots, you do have the option to use a treatment unit. So the peat moss is one example. Waterloo biofilter is another type of system. There's half a dozen systems that are approved in Ontario for that. And so there's different requirements for those kinds of systems. And one of the requirements is that the owner has a maintenance contract and that it gets tested on an annual basis.
So just following up on that, through you, Mr. Chair. So properties change hands all the time. So whether it was an upgraded system or a house addition at it, and that triggers the septic to be reviewed and whatever. So say there's a property that has one of those treatment requirements. Property changes hands. I guess the question would be is the new owner made aware of those requirements? And that's something that goes on the legal side of representation from the lawyers that are doing the transactions, because if somebody has no, especially if they're moving from an area that they've had nothing to do with a septic, and that gets into a whole lot of, but if there's so is that something that is legally binding to the property file? So when that property changes hands, oh yeah, by the way, there's a requirement here for a maintenance and you must have, so can you add any light into that? Because if that's not happening, that's a problem right there. Because if new buyers buy it and they have no idea that they're supposed to be doing this and they're just happy to come up, say even if it's seasonal. So I just wondered if the requirements on that type of system from transfer of one owner to the next.
I don't know, CBO Holt may want to add to this, but they are required to have a contract with like the owner of the system. So when the home gets sold, some real estate agents are very good about communicating those things. Others not so much. Part of a home inspection might capture that, but some of the suppliers of those treatment units who do that maintenance, they have an interest in making sure their system is looked after. So a lot of them will do that follow up with the new owner if they are made aware of that. I would say there's probably still some gaps in that aspect of it. It's a very good point to bring up, that how do you make sure that a new owner is aware of that responsibility? So I don't know.
So I'll come back to that when you
Okay.
get done, and just, I have a bunch of ideas in my head, but the big part of that is on education and questionnaire, where, wherever we start this process, a bit of an understanding of what septic systems are and what they do. And here's the different classes, and can you make sure you find out which you have, and are you aware if it's one that has to have a maintenance contract, you must be, so I'm sure there's a lot of people that have no clue. And then it even goes back to the part about, which I'll add a little bit more, is what you put down the septic and what you do not put down the septic, because if you kill the bugs, you kill your system. And I'm sure 8 out of 10 people don't realize that, or who maybe it's more, but you know what I mean? If you grew up in a septic in a rural, you know septics, but if you come to a piece of property, you have no idea, and you just dump the paint down the septic, and you dump this and chemicals, you kill those bugs. I'm sure, Mac, what you used to always say is, you used to throw an old dead groundhog in a septic tank and that get the bugs going, because you need the organic, but you need that breakdown, right? So if you kill that, you kill your bed, right? So I'll add to that later, but.
Did you want to add anything?
I was just going to say that going through the paper exercise certainly will give us a double check to make sure that these are happening. If Waterloo Biofilter is not doing them anymore, they do give a notification, and then it's our role to follow up with that. So for sure.
And that will be so important once we do an assessment of where our target areas are, of what our records are, and then that'll trigger some things there as well.
That is correct.
I believe Councillor Lohan has a question as well.
Thank you, Chair Nielsen. So in regards specifically to these treatment unit style septic systems, I was wondering, I suppose this is a question for our staff. Do we have even a rough idea of how many of those types of septic tanks there are in the municipality of Grey Highlands? And also, how long have those treatment style systems existed? I imagine that they're a relatively modern advance in septic systems, and I don't know if that's 10 years, 20 years, 40 years. And so I guess what I'm getting at there is, in terms of inspecting the other elements of the septic tank, that's when it would become more important, as they're older. So are there older examples of this type of system in the municipality of Grey Highlands?
I actually can't give you an exact number, I'll be honest with you. But certainly our team is working towards that. So gathering that information. And in regards to it, I'm not sure if we have a timeline for, actually Mac might be able to give us a timeline of when the tertiary systems came in place. I'm not sure whether you want to comment on that, Mac, or.
I can't give an exact date, but it wasn't very long before it was put into Part 8 of the code. Yeah, that's what I was, mid to late 90s. When they were administered through the health unit wasn't a big supporter of tertiary treatment. At that time, it was tertiary before it was level 4. But then when it did go into Part 8 of the building code, the health unit didn't have any choice, so they had to go by the terms of the building code just the same as everybody else. And once it caught on, people were a lot more receptive to it.
If I can just follow up on that quickly, I guess what I'm hearing here is, yes, there are, perhaps many examples of this type of system in the municipality of Grey Highland, and some of them may be approaching 30 years old. So even with an annual inspection of the treatment units itself, the other elements of the system could be failing. That's fair to say?
Yes, I think that's fair to say.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
definitely.
I believe Councillor Allwood has a question as well.
Thank you, Chair Nielsen, for you. I just wondered, so, we do an inspection, problems identified, how do we enforce that? How is that followed up on? What falls on the municipality and the property owner? Does the building code kick in, and our building inspectors require them to get to work if they have to replace, say, the leaching bed, if it's identified that solids have plugged it or something and it's not functioning?
Yes, the owners actually have an obligation under the Act to maintain their septic system in working order.
Okay.
And we can move forward with orders.
But it would be municipal staff that would follow up and enforce that?
That'd be correct.
Thank you.
Don't see any other questions. I think there's still some more of the presentation to give.
Yes, thank you. I can continue on, but lots of good questions, so certainly welcome those as we go through. Okay, so just kind of going through the options of how you may choose to do your program here in Grey Highlands. The discussion of who does the inspections and who administers it varies from one municipality to the next. As I noted before, some municipalities do it entirely within their own building department, others contract it out. In some parts of Ontario, the conservation authorities regulate Part 8 of the building code, and they do the inspections. So there's a number of different models out there. So some consideration should be given to what is going to work here for Grey Highlands. And, you know, if a consultant such as Burnside were to assist with that, what is the division of labor of the parts of the program that Burnside looks after, and what parts can your building department support? So that needs to be established just to determine the scope of the program and who's doing what, basically. And some of that ties into the cost of the program, obviously. And certainly there's a way to do these cooperatively, where the township might do the initial records review and a lot of the setting up and the public outreach aspects, and then the actual boots on the ground inspections, they could be done by Burnside inspectors, or we could do them in conjunction with township staff. So those are things that would need to be worked out. There's many different ways that this can be implemented. So that's something to consider. Next slide, please. So we've already touched on the importance of the public awareness and education aspects of a reinspection program. This is really essential to the success of your program, is to make sure that you have a way to communicate with the public. And the benefits of that education piece are huge. You know, certainly the example of people who move to a rural area, maybe they've lived in a city environment where you flush and forget it and you don't have to think about these things. This can be a huge awareness for them and an eye-opener, and they really, to help them understand the importance of it and their responsibility, the reinspection program can really be a key driver in that part of their understanding. So, you know, communication throughout the program is really important, and certainly providing early notices to owners and making sure they're aware of the specific program details. How is it going to work? When is it going to be done? What are the goals of the program? What are those advantages and benefits of doing the program? Certainly you want to get your public support and buy-in to why it's important. And you may want to consider doing some sort of public information session or an open house style to give people more information and help establish that communication right from the start of the program. And certainly leverage the other tools available, like your website, to have information for your residents. There's also a lot of really good existing brochures and materials that are available. I think CBO Holt has already pulled a few of those documents, but the province has a document called Septic Smart. It's a really good homeowner brochure geared towards just the average person's understanding of the system and explaining some of those important things about what your system is and how does it work and why maintenance is important. So those are, there's that one, and there's a do's and don'ts homeowner brochure from the Ontario On-Site Wastewater Association. So there's a lot of good information out there. You know, sometimes there's also other information that is maybe not as good, but certainly there's lots of good brochures and information that, as part of the reinspection program, that's a really good opportunity to share those resources with your residents so that they know where to go to find information about their system. Next slide, please. So part of the program is obviously the documentation piece. So one of the benefits of a reinspection program is that it can fill in some gaps in your historical records. That's a really good thing to be able to build your database as you go through the program. And it starts to build new information that perhaps isn't currently being collected, such as how often people are pumping their tanks. So if they are required to, as part of the reinspection, produce a record of when they last pumped out their tank, that could now be part of the database of information, and it just starts to build that understanding of what's out there and, you know, how old is it and how is it being looked after. And it can also just be a database of those sampling reports. So those treatment units we were talking about a few minutes ago, part of that annual inspection that the owner is required to have is to take a sample of the effluent and make sure that it's still treating the way that it's designed to be treated. So those records could be built into the program database and gathered as part of that, so that you're basically building a wealth of information that perhaps right now it's in different places, right? The township has permit records, the owner has their tank pump out records, the treatment unit supplier has the maintenance records for those, which get sent to the township as well. But there's sort of these fragmented areas where information is stored. And one of the benefits of a reinspection program is to try to consolidate that information. And it really just helps arm you with knowledge about what's out there in your municipality. The inspection reports can be delivered right to the homeowner so that they have a record of their system and how it was functioning at the time of the inspection. And you can certainly use the inspection report database as a follow-up for deficiencies. So once it gets, if there is a deficiency identified, then the municipal staff would take over the enforcement of that, but now you've got that database record to go back and say, yes, this deficiency was addressed, and it gets documented and everything is in one place. So certainly some benefits to having that complete database and record of information to just eliminate some of the fragmentation that the current setup has, just based on sort of legacy over the years. Things have been done differently. Next slide, please. So a big consideration as part of any program is obviously the cost, and I'm sure your township residents will want to know what is the cost of the program and what they will be responsible for. So the program cost really is going to be varied depending on the scope of the inspection. And in some degree, the quality of the existing records determines sort of how much legwork you have to do as part of the inspection program to fill in the gaps in those records. You know, if your residents are supportive of the program and everyone cooperates and produces the information in a timely manner, things go smoothly. Sometimes things don't go smoothly, so that can just affect how the program goes. And how you're going to staff the program, who's going to do the inspections, that will be a factor in determining what the cost of that is. And then, as I mentioned before, different municipalities have used different models to collect the fee for a reinspection program. So some charge a lump sum fee to the homeowner. Some municipalities have spread it over a number of years. So based on their anticipated length of the program, they divide it up over that number of years, and it goes on the owner's tax bill as a fee each year. Some programs have a kind of a base inspection fee, but then they've identified additional costs if there's a follow-up, or let's say, for example, the inspector gets to the site and the tank isn't accessible and ready for inspection, or the homeowner's not there and you can't get into a locked backyard. They might charge an additional fee to come back. So there's different ways to set up the financial aspects of the proposal, or the program. But the reality is there has to be some way of recovering the costs, and it's really up to the municipality to determine what is the best way for your municipality. Next slide, please. So just the last section of our report was talking about next steps to move forward and implement a reinspection program. So the first thing would be to confirm the scope and the scale of the program, how it's going to be structured, and then how is it going to be, the fee payment structure, how is it going to be recovered? How is that going to be charged to the residents of your municipality? And then establishing a bylaw to implement a reinspection program and how it's going to be implemented. And then you would want to initiate the public awareness aspect of it. I know lots of the residents in your municipality are well aware of these programs, and certainly you want to make sure that everybody has access to that information about what the program is and get that conversation going early. And then working through the municipality's records to assemble the information that you have currently in terms of permits and the number of systems and where they are to establish the program. And then when it's time to set up the actual inspections, you'd have a scheduling system to set up so that people could book their inspections and who's going to do them, and days and times and all of those kind of program logistics would have to be mapped out to really get off the ground. So most of these programs will run during the summer months. Some of them run sort of May to September. If there's not a huge number of systems, it might only be through sort of June, July, August. It's quite flexible when they can be done. Some programs will offer evening and weekend appointments so that homeowners can be home. Some municipalities require the owner to be home. Some say you're not required to be there, but we'd really think it's a good idea if you are. So there's really a lot of permutations and combinations and ways that you can do these programs. And it's really something that can be customized and tailored to the needs and objectives here in Grey Highlands. So I think that concludes my slides, just walking through our report.
Thank you very much, Anne. That was, I think an excellent presentation, great conversation. And through the chair, where would you like to start next? Is there any questions that we
We're going to
would
say,
like to
so if we
address?
go to councils, is there anybody who has any questions? I see Mayor McQueen and I see Councillor Dubyk. So we'll go Mayor McQueen first.
Well, thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for your presentation. Very informative, and I hope there's lots of people watching today. A couple of things. One, I think really goes back to the part I was raising was about education and the understanding of those that are on septic systems. I think that is so key, because I know at one of our town hall meetings, I think the subject came up, and I don't think the individual really knew much about their own system. And no disregard to anybody on that. It's just, I've even learned stuff today. So we have a place up in Georgian Bay Township, and they do inspections, and we have a property on a lake. So they do a mandatory inspection where I get a notice in the mail and it's a visual. They come out. Now our system is probably, I think it was built in 2004. Probably maybe because of the age and what it's there and the records they have. We just get a thing in the mail. We're going to be out at a certain time and inspect your property, and never hear anymore. No cost. Just, they do that. So building on that, I think, so say for example, and they also have it that if it's within a kilometer of a municipal water, a lake or water intake protection zone, then it's mandatory. Right, so there's criteria around, and then this discretionary re-inspections probably your other properties that aren't close to water, if that's where that's what they do. And so to start off with, so if we are focusing on our water bodies, and I think to start with, we need to have a database of, and I know, used to do a bit of contracting, and I know one particular property, we expanded the house and we had to go back to look at the septic, and the Grey Bruce Health Unit at that time had records back to the 60s on this, and it was there, we were able to find it through a building permit. We were able to, because the addition, we were able to expand to the septic, put a bigger tank in, carry on, the current system was fine. And that was okay at that time, but they had records. So in my mind, one, to build a database, so say let's just focus on Lake Eugenia. So I think in your report, say there's 400, some people say 350, whatever there are residential units. Do a database of each property to the records we have. So I know there's been a lot of development around Lake Eugenia in the last 20 years, you know, even leading up to our first zoning bylaw. So obviously in the last 20 years, we'll have good records. But, you know, so going down and getting that information, and now it's, I guess, Karen, Grey Bruce Health Unit used to do it, but now it's rolled back into the municipality that we do it. I don't know if those records are now with us or they're somewhere else. We'll get to that in a minute. So build that database. But obviously, in my mind, if we have no information on a piece of property, that's a red flag. Right? So, and you know, I've been around long enough. I know the original systems were a round tank and clay tile. Right? And you know, the water faucets or it's, you know, as we've moved on in the last 50 years, things have expanded in the house. There's more water closet, there's bigger shower, like, you know, however, whatever. So to me, that would be the first flag on no information. Obviously, I think around Lake Eugenia, and we've seen it where a lot of those small cottages were bought, expanded. As soon as you get into expanding in a building code, that triggers your septic. So then we have that new record. So they brought up to the new code. And so that is good information that we will have more recently. You know, I'm not going to try to guess on how many around Lake Eugenia that we may have no record on. I don't know. And maybe we have record on them all, and that would be great. So anyway, so that's one part of I think is building a database, educating our residents. And there's a lot of things that can come to play. I know one time I have a backhoe, and a number of years back I was called to farm property where they had the new people bought the property and they weren't sure where the tank is. We found the tank because they wanted to get it pumped. Obviously, it wasn't part of the criteria for before it sold. But anyway, so we found it, dug down, found the lid, and on top of that, you could walk on top of. Once we pulled the lid off, you could walk on. That's how hard it was. It was that hard. I don't even know how the system was even working. I think it was down to the point where maybe one person was living there or whatever. So the person that was pumping it out had to, you know, had to get that loosened up. Like, I mean, basically break through and add water, add water, add water. So that's the worst case scenario. I've never seen something anyway with soil. Anyway, not to dwell on that, but so, you know, and the other thing is in a lot of cases, and doing research here and talks about when a system starts to fail, you're right. That's not good. But generally the homeowner will find out pretty quick because it just all backs up, right? And all of a sudden, and I was looking here, signs of, and this goes back to the educational part, signs of slow drainage, gurgling, gobbling, making noise. Obviously signs of sometimes if you flush the toilet and it comes up the tub, you know, there's a problem. That's a big problem. So again, those are early things that probably a lot of homeowners have realized, but at that point, you know, how much damage is done to the bed itself because, and you're right, I guess that's part of the site inspection where if you start to see leaching, green grass, sprayed, you know, that's all indications as well. The other thing that I've experienced is, you know, as time goes on, people love to plant trees. And the worst thing for a septic system is moist areas and dry weather, and trees will gravitate to those wet areas and clog your bed, you know, I've seen it where it's just a massive root mass, like the bed not working. Obviously it trans into, well, you can't flush the toilet anymore because through time it gets restricted. So those are part of the education that, and it doesn't happen overnight. It could be changes of land, property, and we need a nice tree, or the trees get bigger. But, trees take time to develop and that. But when that gets into your bed, your bed's done for, you have to redo it, and it just gets in there and it's amazing. So again, this all goes back to education and understanding, because, and I think we need to, on the education side, explain that, early awareness and understanding of your system will save you money. And I think that's got to be your message on how you're moving forward. And also, and again, I go back to the Georgian Bay Township, they talk about water quality and protect your shoreline and all that kind of stuff, which you don't want to have that effect on that as well. So so those are just some points that and a lot of people don't, they buy, they have no idea where the tank is. Like, I know I bought a property a number of years back, and there was a diagram that came with it that showed where it was, which is very handy because I've had it pumped out, and to know, measure from this point of the house to that point of the house where it intersects, and it's bang on. And that's so important, and maybe that's part of, you said, real estate licensed real estate people to make sure that is, some probably do better jobs than others. And I think it's so important but I'm sure, when people buy a new property, and like you said, especially if they're not familiar with a septic system, it's like everything's fine until something's not working, right? And all those things. So those are just some points of I think where we need to get data. In summary, Mr. Chair, data, education, awareness before we come down with a heavy hand. But I would agree on those areas that maybe we see it's more important that there is a record of the pumping out, because I don't know, they always, I don't know what the rule of thumb is, and it probably varies 3 to 5 years, 2 to 3 years. I don't know what that is, but certainly within 5 years is probably a good thing. And it all depends probably on the amount of usage. But then somebody said, if it doesn't get used enough, maybe you don't have enough bugs in there working the system either, right? And bugs are good because that breaks things down. So I'll leave it there, Mr. Chair, but those are just some points that I wanted to start off with.
Okay, Mayor Green, thank you very much. Councillor Dubyk, you had your hand raised before.
Yes, thank you so much. So Anne and Mac, thank you so much for joining us today. It's much appreciated. It's always nice to have this expertise that we can tap into. So I have a question around sort of that tension and that balance between resourcing, time in, and cost versus the type of inspection and the effectiveness of the inspection. Wondering if you can talk a little bit more about in terms of the comparison of just say like a visual program inspection approach versus a visual plus the cap open versus a more intrusive. So a little bit more in terms of, because we are trying to get to that sweet spot of cost and resourcing versus effectiveness. Thank you.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Mac probably wants to add some of this as well based on your experience, but it's sort of a progression, right? So you want to find that balanced approach, and a visual only inspection is better than nothing. Certainly getting on the property and taking a look, there is benefit to that. At the other end of the spectrum, a fully intrusive inspection is, you could do more damage than good in that case. And, there's certainly some liabilities for the municipality there if the locates aren't properly done, or, you damage someone's bed in the process, then there's a lot more follow-up. So somewhere in the middle is what I think most programs have found is a good balance, is kind of the visual only of the bed area due to those risks with trying to get into the ground. But it's fairly minimal extra work to take the lid, to open the lid of a tank and have a look in there. So the additional benefit that you get from looking at the tank in its current operating state can really inform the inspection more than just, like, if the lids are covered with soil, you can't tell anything about the tank and its function. But if you open that lid and have a look, you're going to know if it's operating properly. Is it, is it in high level, and things are going to, maybe it hasn't backed up into the house yet, but it might be something that is going to happen soon. Or, maybe it's in low level and there's something leaking, and you're going to be able to identify that and stop that liquid from leaving the tank and not going through the proper channels of the bed. So I think based on the research and the programs that have been done, there seems to be that balance of visual, but with some additional look in the tank, because it's not difficult to open a tank, and the additional value that you get out of that is really informs the inspection. So hopefully that gives you a better sense of that kind of, it's a balance of, as you say, cost and the level of inspection. But if you're already sending someone to the site anyway, the additional effort to look in a tank lid and document that is fairly incremental. So there's a much more benefit than the additional cost of that. So
So if I may, as a follow-up to that, Chair, so when it comes to actually opening up the lid, who typically would be responsible to do that? Like, would it be the homeowner or the inspector? And I'm also just kind of wondering about liabilities, et cetera.
a lot of programs will require the homeowner to have the tank lid accessible and exposed. So if you have soil over your tank, the owner would be responsible in advance of the scheduled inspection to have the lid exposed so that the inspector can remove the lid and look. Now, there's I forget which municipality I was looking at their setup, and they had some notes about, if you have a tank with heavy concrete lids, the inspector's not necessarily going to be able to show up and get that. So most programs have found that putting that on the resident to prepare for the inspection as part of the communication would be, you need to prepare. Here's the things you need to do: is have your tank exposed if it's buried. So, if get someone to help you shovel off the lids. And then if it's easily opened because it's a screwed down plastic lid, the inspector can do that. If it is a heavier concrete lid, then that's put on the homeowner to have that ready and removed. But, there's certainly different ways that have been done, but I think that seems to be what people have gravitated to, that works, is to put that on the owner. So, and that helps them figure out where their tank is in advance if they don't know, right? So.
And it just on that point. So thank you. And I think that also makes a lot of sense, because then the homeowner actually gets to know their septic tank a little bit better, and they'll get a little bit more curious about it. And then just one question just around that. How long could you keep that tank opened? So say if you have people, they may or may not be on site, but would have to open up their tank. How long could you keep that open safely?
Yeah, I think that would be a concern with the larger concrete lids, and having the owner have to have that open in advance by someone who can do that. The other lids that can just be removed by me with my drill to open the screws, it can stay closed, and then it's not a safety risk. And then the inspector would just open it when they arrive, do their inspection, close it back up. That's the ideal situation. It's not necessarily every case, but I think there would be some apprehension about leaving anything open. It is a safety hazard. So it may be that you have to build into your communication with the owners when you do the initial questionnaire, do you have a tank that has concrete lids? And then you might need to do some additional outreach to coordinate, like the inspector would have to coordinate so that that is timed appropriately and not being left open and creating that safety hazard. So I don't know, CBO.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you. I'll go back in queue with my other questions. Thank you, Chair.
Does any other council member have a question? I see Councillor Lowhead's hand raised.
Thank you, Chair Nielsen. So certainly one of the greatest apprehensions for folks will be the cost, not so much for the inspection itself, but the fear that they're going to be found, non-compliant, and that then immediate remediation will be thrust on them. And I think that there's a lot of unknowns about what it may even cost. I mean, obviously proximity to a water body, it could be many tens of thousands of dollars, right, for these big modern expensive systems. So I'm wondering if we can get any information around funding models or financing models, more like from other municipalities. I've heard anecdotally that some municipalities assist in the installation of a new septic system through like 0% financing, debenturing, that kind of thing. And so I'm wondering if anybody could give any color around that.
I actually have not done that research, I'll be honest with you. I know that there is some opportunities in other municipalities I talked to in regards to if there's if you pay for a septic with the reinspection, and if there's some deficiencies found, they have credited what they cost for the inspection back on the permit. So there are some things that have had happened, but I did not explore that, to be honest with you. So.
If I may just add to that, the way that I view it is the reinspection is really just identifying problems that are already there. So the owner would have had to do something anyway, and it's just a matter of when. So I realize that doesn't help people come up with money on the spot to fix things, and they can get into very expensive repairs. But, I think there are some areas where they've set up a funding or some kind of a loan program to let people pay it back over time. So that might be something to explore further, because it can be a significant cost. It can be $40,000 to put in a brand new system. All systems have a finite life. So this preventative maintenance that comes through the education piece can help your system last a lot longer. And, at some point, owners will need to replace it, but it can defer that cost if you're taking care of your system. I would liken it to if I buy a car and I don't change the oil and do that very minimal cost, preventative, regular maintenance, my car is not going to last as long. And it's the same with a sewage system. So, there's different parts of the education piece that can help people understand that. But I think that certainly there are costs to be considered, and it really, there has to be a way to come up with a program that will work for your municipality with what you're trying to achieve. So
I'll just quickly follow up on that. I mean, it's something I suppose this would require more staff investigation and research. Again, I've heard anecdotally that these types of things can be, financed through the municipality at debentured rates, so that it's a lower rate for the owner. It's sort of a win-win, that way we're ensuring that septic tanks are kept up to date, installed as they need to be installed, and the owners aren't being crushed under, sort of surprise costs. It's again, something that I've heard has worked well in other municipalities. So I just hope that we maybe investigate that a little bit further.
Councillor Allen?
Thank you. I'd like to hear from Mac. He's had, what's it say, 55 years of experience. I'd like to hear his experience with inspections and what perhaps we can expect to find if we do put in a compulsory septic inspection program.
Well, one thing I found when the word got out that it was going to be inspections, most people know if their system's working properly or not. And they aren't going to want to have a system inspected and then be ordered to replace it. I found 9 times out of 10 they would go ahead and try to beat that municipality to the gun And when they get there, it's all good and done right. So that's a big part of my experience. We used to do some for real estate transactions, that sort of thing. And when the people were calling for the inspection, they really didn't know what they were calling for, because the first question is how, like, I can inspect it, I can take a walk around your yard, or we can camera the whole system, and then the costs just go poof, you know. So I think what Ann has suggested, that they're leaning towards to, as a minimum, have the tank uncovered, have it accessible, you know. And I always like to see them before they're pumped. That tells you exactly where the level is, and you can show the homeowner where the level is. And then, you know, ideally, if the pumper can come before they leave and the owner's on side with that, then if there's issues with the partition in the tank or the baffles in the tank, you can explain that to them then too. It's a lot easier than trying to draw them a picture or explain it to them, and people can nod their head, but lots of times they really don't understand what you're talking about. So I think inspection programs are great. And like Ann has mentioned, a big part of it is getting an audit of what is in the ground, you know, good, bad, or otherwise. At least we know it's there and what's coming down the tube. But that's been my experience with it. But one thing, when Paul was talking about treatment systems there, and I know it's not up to council or not necessarily up to building department, but those maintenance agreements has always been my opinion that they should be registered on title. So the lawyer, if he didn't pick it up, that's his fault, her fault, whoever, because you can't count on the real estate people to disclose that, and you certainly can't count on the owner to disclose it. Not that anything's crooked about it. It just might not, if you didn't ask, you might not find out. So, I mean, just, and I know you can't change it, but again, you talk to the people that could change it more than I do. So, but I've been preaching that for 25 years and it hasn't happened. So, but no, and generally I always found people receptive to reinspection, especially around the lakes, you know, especially the ones that have a new system, because they want everybody else to get on board too. But I'd be surprised. You're going to have some pushback, but I don't think it'll be huge. I think it'd be welcome more than it would be pushback on.
Just a quick follow-up about the that you think people around the lake will welcome this. A lot of times we don't find out if we've made a good decision until we make it. Then we get feedback from people. This motion was, I think, November of 24. So there's been 3 or 4 months, and I haven't heard anybody saying, "What on earth are you doing? This is ridiculous." So I think people are receptive to this.
Thank you for that, Councillor Allen. Councillor Allwood.
Thank you, Chair Nielsen, for you. Just on your question, the MAC there, but in that FOCA report there, it mentions that, you know, in a sample size of 370 clients, 42% of them have major deficiencies. And our consultant Ann mentioned that, you know, these rectifying that can be $40,000 if it's, you know, you've got to put a new system in there. So I would think, given the number of systems we have in Grey Islands, if we're going to put a program in place where we're loaning money, and that's something we should think about very carefully. It could be some big numbers, and the onus should be on the property owners to. I mean, it's in their best interest to have this. I live on a farm. I have 2 septic systems and 2 houses, and I had to locate my tanks and put riders on them to service them properly. And you know, if you're not doing that, then as the consultant said, it's like not maintaining your car. You just, at some point, you're going to be buying a new car a lot earlier than you think you might. But these systems need to be maintained. I guess as Mayor McQueen mentioned, a lot of people that weren't used to being on septic don't realize that, you know, I could just It's just like in the city, I can flush my toilet and not worry about it until something happens with the sewer system, which is somebody else's problem, but it's not the same with septic systems. So I think, you know, we've already sort of given some direction that we're considering a mandatory program for lakefront properties. I have had an opportunity to talk to some residents of Lake Eugenia. Most of them are newer residents that have got big homes that have probably just put their systems in, so they're all for an inspection program because, I guess, they figure they're going to be safe. But there's a lot of cottages on Lake Eugenia that are older that the owners probably don't even know where their tanks are. And when you try to go back in records and find out where they are, you know, you may have a drawing, you may have something on file with the permit, but what can happen with these systems is, you know, when the installer's putting them in, if they get into a problem and there's some huge boulder or something, they move it over a couple of feet, and then it all gets buried, and time goes on, and try and find that, and you can try and find it with a probe, but in Grey Highlands, you're going to hit rocks every time you do it, so that's kind of useless. And people tell you use a metal detector and you'll find those metal handles. Well, good luck with that too. I had an opportunity through another contractor that recommended a system that they used, a ground source radar. They were able to map the tanks, map the leaching beds, dimension the systems. And, you know, I thought, geez, what's this going to cost? But it was a reasonable cost, much cheaper than having to excavate and try and find it, which is what I thought I'd have to do if I couldn't find my tanks.
Flush a ball too.
You can flush a ball, but I talked to Wilton's about that, and it works and doesn't work sometimes, and they don't do it anymore. So I'm not sure, but anyways, yeah, it's a good idea to have a program, and just how it works can get complicated. I think the report captured that. You know, you're going to get some people that are going to welcome it, and other people that are going to say, "Yeah, how am I going to pay for this?"
Thank you very much, Councillor Alwood, for those optimistic comments. Councillor Wickens.
Thank you, Chair Nielsen. So when we come to septic tanks with no records, or just septics with no records at all, and so you advise the homeowner, we're going to come and, you know, well, I don't know where my tank is, so we've got to find the tank to start with. To get the tank dug up, everything looks fine in the tank, but you don't know what's out there for a bid. It could possibly be just a pipe that goes straight to a water course or to the lake. That's never going to fail. So the idea is to catch polluters, I guess, or what do we do in that case when there's no records, but you know, you look down the hole and everything looks fine. But in reality, it isn't.
One of the suggestions I think that was in my report was there would be potentially an option to use a dye test that the inspector could do on site. If you put some fluorescing dye, you're going to know if it comes out in the ditch or in the creek. So that might be something, you know, it doesn't necessarily need to be done on every site, but it could be something that if the inspector shows up and they know there's no record, we don't know where things are, maybe when they get there, they drop some dye in the tank, and while they're doing their other inspection, it's going to make its way out. So that's an option. It's not a foolproof way, but it would certainly be a tool that could be added to the inspector's toolkit to try to identify that type of situation.
If I may, Chair Nielsen, I guess this question would be to our building inspector. Do you know if that has ever been done in the municipality around the lakes and some villages, like along the Beaver River, Feversham, for example?
I personally have not participated in that, but I know that it has been done before.
It has been
We
done.
we actually have some dye in our
Yep.
toolkit. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that was just something that I was pondering, and I'm probably sure that you folks are aware of the tiny township has bylaws. I read through that, and they have a mandatory pumping thing, and you have to you have to provide proof that you've had it pumped. I believe it's every 3 years that they do it. And another thing about getting the word out there, I don't think people actively search for, how do I look after I was wondering about public service announcements and stuff like that to a captive audience on TV and radio and I guess more to like social media and stuff like that. I'm quite sure that probably the province would likely help out with costs and fees with that, but I think that should be something that could be looked into, like just thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Wickens. Mayor McQueen, I see your hand raised again.
Yeah, a couple of things, and just following up with Councilor Wiggins, I mean, this is the whole thing about education. People need to be educated. I witnessed the septic systems that were put in late 60s, early 70s, and they had the pipes with the holes and the 3/4 inch stone underneath to do what you would do today. So, I mean, that through a permit process, that goes back, 55 years of systems. So, but then there's systems with the steel drum and a few clay tiles that I would think by now those drums are probably rotted away or however, but anyway. So just going back to the part about I think for this education part, so if that was your septic and you have two sections in your tank, and you said for you pull the lid off and it gives you a good idea of what's going on. Because so basically you have a pipe in and a pipe out. So I guess the one thing that if you pull it off and it water boiled up, it would tell you your pipe out has issues, right? So that's I think that's what probably your first awareness would be, is all of a sudden there's pressure here, it's not getting away, and that would be the one indication. Because normally if you pull the lid off, it will be down probably at the top of those top inlet and outlets, right? Would that be fair to say? Like, so wherever that outlet is, that should be where your tank line should be, right? And then it's flowing to your bed. So I think that's the important part of understanding what that means, right? So fluid in, fluid out, solids go into the tank. And so just as an understanding, so when those solids go into the tank, and this is no difference with a municipal system, you got to have good bugs. That's breaking that down. And I guess to a certain part, as the time goes on, so after your tank's pumped out, those parts in your tank are for the solids to be maintained. But as time goes on, the solids that can't be broken down and go into your bed, they start to build up. And that's the whole part of having it pumped out. So if you probably, like Dan said, had your tank pumped out on a regular 3-year basis, you're keeping ahead of those solids. And it all depends on the usage. If you have, 18 people in the house, it's going to be different than 2 people in the house, no doubt. And then, so I guess my first question is, if that is maintained, and if there's beds out there that are 50 years, as long as you keep the solids out of your bed, that bed should last for a long time. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, that's a fair statement. You want to keep the solids out of the bed. Certainly it will last longer if you do that. Gradually over time, like the bed is doing about 70% of the treatment. The tank is holding the solids and the solids are digesting, but the liquid is going out into the bed and the soil is filtering and you're getting biological treatment in the soil. But over time, that biological material is going to accumulate in the pipes and in the stone around the pipes and in the soil around the stone. So it's a progression over time.
So it starts to get saturated a little bit.
Well, it's more of a biofilm buildup, right? So
Okay.
If you've ever looked into a failed bed, you'll see black sludge and in the pipes, and it can coat the.
So it starts to seal it.
Yep. It's like a bioslime coating that builds up gradually over time, and that's part of how these systems work. It's just if you limit what can get out of the tank in terms of physical materials, it will prevent that from blocking the bed. And it's more just the gradual biological buildup over time. So it will last a lot longer.
So that leads into my next comment or question is, I put a new septic we built a newer house just recently, and it was inspected, passed, but the tank had a filter at the end, which I understand and I should do, is you're supposed to pull that out and wash it out. Because that's supposed to prevent some of that silting that goes into your, so I guess that's on my checklist that I better do this summer, I guess, right? But again, that's part of the education, because the word on the street would be is, once you put the bed and throw that damn thing away, because it'll be a problem. And I've heard that, but I've heard that. But it, don't want to go any further than that.
Don't do that.
No. But my point is that's a newer technology that is put in place to extend that bed. So it's all part of maintenance, right? And so that's my point about education, is as the technology has advanced, there's better control parts that have been put in place on those. And I don't know how long, Karen, those newer systems with that filtering, whatever you want to call it, has been in place, but if it's the last 10 years, but obviously that's a maintenance in itself from an educational part as well, which again is to extend the length of that bed. So there's so much education, you know, that I'm still learning. Even I've been, you know, but I'm just bringing those points up, that just that point of newer systems. Right. So I guess when you really get that tank pumped, you should be taking that thing out, and maybe it should that be hosed out every year. Right. Right. And I know that tank that I have too, it does have the green lids that you talk about, the screws that you pull off and you put them at the surface, and makes it much easier. And the last comment is, I think if you were leaving a concrete tank open for inspection, and say you're not there during the week and you're leaving it for inspection, you would definitely want to have a piece of plywood or something that's securing, because you don't want anybody or any animal to fall into that either, right? So you want to make sure that's part of it as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor McQueen. Councillor Dubyk.
Thank you. So we've been talking a lot about the mandatory inspection program. Also wondering what a discretionary program would look like. Is that like, purely like an educational type of program? Wondering if you can provide a little bit more color around that, and maybe where you've seen it and the effectiveness of a mandatory program. Discretionary program. Thank you.
The way the building code and the Building Code Act describe mandatory and discretionary, the province mandates certain areas of the province that have to have an inspection program. So for example, within a certain distance of Lake Simcoe, there's a requirement to inspect. So in the building code framework, any program that you do is actually a discretionary program at the discretion of the municipality. So perhaps the better way I might describe it would be voluntary versus required by the township. So I know some municipalities do have that option where it is voluntary, where they give people the opportunity to participate in the program. I think you will just inherently, human nature is they don't get around to it. So you will get a lower participation rate by doing a voluntary program. It might be a way to start, and then you could build on that. But I think a lot of the programs that are out there, they have found success in identifying this is where it's going to be required, because it's waterfront or because it's in a groundwater source protection area, or there's a reason that triggers a need to look at it, and trying to get that buy-in from the public of why it's important, and it's in everyone's best interest to protect those resources. And then it's sort of mandatory from that sense and not voluntary. But I don't know if did you want to add anything, CBO Holt?
Actually, I was thinking to myself, I remember Mac used that as one of your roles when you had a business still. You did actually go on and do some servicing for private citizens. Do you want to maybe talk a little bit about that?
Well, if that was the case, it was generally when the property was changing hands or something. Occasionally somebody would buy it and not have it inspected, and then they realize they do have a septic system, and then they want it checked out. Certainly that's a voluntary situation, but again, how far do you go? you know, like you look at your tank, you can camera it, but quite often you don't get any farther than the head or the distribution box doing that. I used to tell people quite often, like, it's going to cost you $2,000 or $3,000 to look at the system. Maybe you just keep that money in your pocket, like have the tank checked, have the tank pumped, do all that good stuff. That's just maintenance. But as far as trying to satisfy yourself by digging and all that, I never encouraged it, unless you had to know because you're planning an addition on your building or another building that you had to know for setbacks. So that was my experience with it.
And if I can just add, I did, before this meeting today, I did check with a local septic company that pumps septics, and the cost is $345. So it's not, you know, it's a good investment in the system that they're using. And second of all, if I could just mention, we do have many of the health unit records from the 70s, early 70s on. So we do have that. It's over the years, it was saved in different ways, so that we have to be a little bit, inventive in regards to doing our septic record search, but we certainly do that and provide that for residents who require that, so.
No follow-up for that one, Councillor Dubyk. So Councillor Wickens.
Thank you, Chair Nielsen. I just, one quick question about, I guess some of the municipalities that have programs. Do they have municipal staff that, if you know, the municipal staff that actually do the inspections, or do they, they farm it out to, somebody that's out there to like a private business? Or I'm just thinking of cost, if you had a municipal person that was, they could probably do half a dozen a day. I'm just, that's speculation, but anyways, I'll let you, if you can answer that.
Yeah, so there are a variety of models out there. Some municipalities have dedicated inspectors that are hired as part of their building department staff, and they do other building permit inspections and functions, but they would also have full-time inspectors that do the re-inspection program. Some municipalities will hire summer students to do that under a trained inspector. So summer students are quite popular in this type of program because the timing works with the timing you want to do these. You can train them, and they can work with more seasoned inspectors to know what they're looking for. And then there's other municipalities who contract it out to a consulting firm, whether it's Burnside or other firms that do this kind of inspection program, and they oversee everything as kind of a consultancy project where they do all the bookings, they hire the inspectors, they train them, they manage the data, and then they would come back and report to the municipality. So it's really quite a range of different ways to do it. Bigger municipalities maybe have more ability to have their own staff do it. Smaller municipalities maybe don't have that much resource in-house. So it has to be worked out with what will work for your situation. So I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
I think that's exactly true. And we certainly do, of course, the new installs and septics, and the septic, if you're having if you're modifying your septic, we certainly do that. And I should have also made a comment earlier in regards to, we do, to close up, to finalize a septic permit, we do ask for an as-built from the installer, just to have the measurements and have that as part of the permanent record. So that does become part of the permanent record.
Councillor Wickens, any follow-up? Don't see any. So then Councillor Allwood.
Thank you, Chair Nielsen. Just on the subject cost, I mean, I think in the report it mentioned like a mandatory program would cost $130,000 a year, and that's a starting point probably. Whether I'm not sure whether that, but there.
Only talking about Lake Eugenia as well, I think.
Yeah, that was, we were talking about a pilot project on Lake Eugenia. But those type of costs, so there's some, the costs associated with that. There's also the subject of, are we gonna charge property owners for, there's cost recovery that needs to be considered. And, if you look at that FOCA report, which, Ann mentioned, the, overall lessons learned, voluntary programs are unlikely to reach the systems that are most in need of replacement, because the residents may fear the costs of the repair will be overwhelming. So if you got people that aren't maintaining their systems, there may be financial reasons for that. It may not just be not knowing that they're supposed to. There are costs associated with keeping these systems operating that sometimes are beyond the means of some of our residents. But if we're talking about the issues around Lake Eugenia, which seems to be, if we were considering a program, I guess that would be where we would start. I guess the Lake Management Task Force would have some comments on that.
So we've been at this for an hour and 40 minutes. What I might suggest is a 10-minute break. We can come back at 10:55. This will give everybody a chance to stretch your legs, refresh, and when we come back, the premise of today is to kind of bring recommendations to council. So we can kind of think about what recommendations we want to make out of this committee of the whole to council to move this kind of concept forward. So I'll recess till 10:55. And welcome back, everyone. So the last comment that was made was from Councillor Allwood asking about the idea of the Lake Management Committee. We have had a pretty good conversation so far about this topic, and the premise is whether or not we're having council move forward and what kind of ideas we want to send over to the actual council table for recommendations. I do see Mayor McQueen's hand up, so I'll go to you first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm gonna throw out some ideas. Definitely an educational part of whether it's on our website, something that's maybe in our second tax installment that has a spot that you can go and find that stuff. I think education is so important. Two, I would just throw it out there that I think, and I think we're using Lake Eugenie as our pilot, right? That I would think any system that's older than 5 years old would need to have an inspection, like a physical inspection, and also a proof of their septic's being pumped out in the last 3 years. I just throw it out there for starters, because one is education and where to go. And I think on that education, I think Karen, you mentioned that you checked into a pump installer. I think if we could provide maybe 6 pump installers that they have options, I think like make it as simple as possible. Hey, there's a list to go. There's no, but if I think a visual inspection and a proof of your septic being pumped in the last 3 years, I think would go a long way. I just throw it out there to start the discussion.
I'll look to Councillor Dubyk and then Councillor Wickens.
Yeah, thanks for getting that going, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, so totally agree. Obviously, education is a very important piece of this, just so we, to ensure we all know what our septic systems are all about. So and just taking a step back, I think, what we've heard, from our the members of our community is, at least this is what I've heard, is, there's strong support, for our program, and that's why we're here today. Of course, a lot of that started around Lake Eugenia because they have the most concerns with the algae blooms. And so maybe just even when we talk about sort of just the area, so I think there is general agreement that we do want a program. When we think about the general area and scope of the program, a lot of our residents have been using tiny townships. They've been pointed to the tiny township reinspection program, and they have gone mandatory or required. I'll use that those words. The required program for their whole municipality, and I think that's sort of a point where a decision point for us is is it for our whole municipality, or is it for more specific environmentally sensitive areas? I think what I've heard from today is it makes sense to go for the whole municipality, because when we even think about, of course, our lakes are a very sensitive area, and so are our, rural areas. They're all sensitive areas. And so I would support a program, a required program for the whole municipality. Do we start, as Mayor McQueen has started, but maybe it's a pilot with Lake Eugenia first, given it's a real critical area. And if we can get that up and going for Lake Eugenia right away, with the intention then to roll it out more broader, with a pilot, I guess one of the advantages would be then to learn, from a smaller area first, and then we can kind of tweak any learnings to strengthen the program and then maybe roll out. But I'll just put that out there because I think that may also be part of, that will be a decision, a decision point that we will need to make. We don't necessarily need to make that today, but as we think about the motion, I think, in terms of the information that we want back, we may need to just sort of frame that up. So I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Dubyk. And just thinking, if you're thinking mandatory over the entirety of the municipality, even a phased-in approach, because of the vast geography and probably the number of septic systems that would exist across all of Grey Highlands, that phased-in approach of saying lakefront or Lake Eugenia, moving on to lakefront of the other lakes that exist within the municipality, and then moving on from there as kind of your phased-in approach that would begin your cycle. Because I would think an inspection program would be happening on a X year rotational cycle. And so you'd kind of implement that and then it would be back to the beginning again. So something like that. Councillor Dubyk.
Yeah, and thank you for that, because as a follow-up, if you do take a look at the township of Tiny, they do have a map where they show their municipality broken out into areas by year. So, whenever they started, right? So say in 2020, it's this section, right? And it's in 2021, it's this section, 2022, it's this section. And then and I believe they're on a 6-year cycle. And I think that's also important for us. Like, that's another decision point in terms of what do we think is that cycle? Is it 5, 6, 7 years, whatever that is? So that we do keep on top of the program and ensuring that, it's a continuous program. It's not just sort of a one-time thing, but it is a continuous program. And we'll need to decide what we want that cycle to be for ourselves as well.
Councillor Wickens and then Councillor Alwood.
Thank you, Chair Nielsen. I wonder if we could have staff look into putting together a public service announcement and what the cost might be to put it on TV or radio or social media, whatever. Like I say, it's better to have the captive audience force feed it to them. I guess. Thanks.
I think that's something we can definitely have done, Councillor Wickens, if the motion is put forward. You did mention that there might be some public health dollars or public dollars. Staff can look into that too, as to whether or not Ontario itself has funding for messaging like that. Councillor Alwood.
Thank you, Chair Nielsen. I mean, I think today we were going to get together. We'd already sort of talked about a mandatory pilot project on Lake Eugenia with a voluntary program for all septic systems in Grey Highlands. So today's committee of the whole was sort of an education for us as we try to put our minds together on how we could, we need to ask for a staff report if we want to move forward with those options, what this is going to cost, how it's going to be financed. We've had expert advice today from Mac and Ann, and again, the public education part of this, we need to have a public meeting, especially if we're going to go with a mandatory program. And I would also suggest, after hearing today and reading these reports, that are mandatory programs in our source water protection areas, because in some of our hamlets that aren't on municipal services, you've got those concerns. So, I think the mandatory program needs to be extended into that area, from my perspective. But, I think the way to move this forward, Chair, would be to ask for a staff report. If council still wants to move ahead with a pilot mandatory program and a municipal-wide voluntary program, and understanding that there's costs associated with that, and you've got to put systems in place. There's more than one way to do this. The Folker report that was referenced in the presentation today is an excellent document. But we do have some stuff on our municipal website right now on septic systems. If you click on there, and if you need a permit, you got to do this. If you're, there's a video I think that's going to be added to it that at some point. But I think the recommendation to council out of this group today should be a staff report. How do we implement this program if that's the will of the committee to implement these mandatory and municipal-wide voluntary programs? And there's a breakdown of a table in the report that says, the permit. This would come out in the staff report if this is the way we move forward. But you've got to see what documents we have permit review, initial mail out to owners, creation of the public information that was all there, who does it, what it costs. Well, we would need a staff report to do that, I believe.
Thanks
So
for that.
my suggestion would be that the motion should be a recommendation from this committee to staff, that they come back with a staff report if that's what we want to do.
I'm just going to go to Clerk Van Alstyne for clarity. So my understanding is an option got put forward to council to do the mandatory in Lake Eugenia and voluntary around, but that the motion actually didn't get so fully supported. It got sent to committee of the whole for discussion and for education. So just for clarity, Clerk Van Alstyne, if you can help me with where we are in this process.
Thank you through you, Chair Nielsen. That is actually what I wanted to bring up, is that the motion that was passed in council was for the education. This is your education you're receiving today. Where we go from here is what we're looking for direction on. Do you want a mandatory program? Do you want a voluntary program? Do you want it across the entire municipality? Do you want it, you know, in specific areas? Do you want it every 3 years, every 5 years, every 6 years? And then I think if you gave a little bit of guidance that way, staff would go back, develop a draft program, and then that draft program would have to come back to council for approval at that point. That program would also have to include some costs associated with it, some staffing requirements, all of those kinds of things. But I think until there's more specifics on what council exactly is looking for, or committee of the whole in this moment, I think it's going to be very difficult to get the answers you're looking for.
Thank you for that, Clerk Van Alstyne. That was kind of where I thought I was, where we were in. To Councillor Allwood, whose thoughts was on this idea of getting the staff report coming forward, kind of the next step. So Councillor Allwood.
Just as a follow-up, yeah, I don't think that we today are going to make those decisions on how the program works. We just, if it is a mandatory program, then we would count on the staff report to give us options on the timing, the costs, and if it's a voluntary program, on how the education part would work, and the cost and how you implement that. I mean, I'm assuming that we would not just, we would have a public meeting with the mandatory septic tank community and say, here's how we're thinking of going forward, or get public input at some point in this before we come up with a bylaw. But
to you, Councillor Allwood. Go ahead.
I think today, a motion to look for that staff report, if the committee of the whole is recommending that there should be some sort of mandatory program, we should give some advice today on where we think that should be. If it's just like a pilot project on Lake Eugenia and the mandatory source water protection areas, and a voluntary program, which is what we were talking about back in November, I guess, whenever that was, but last year. So, I mean, I'd be willing to make that motion.
So I think,
but
Councillor Allwood,
I'd like to hear from other councillors before, other committee, the whole members, before, maybe we should have a brief discussion on that before we make a motion. Thank you.
I think, fair. Sorry, Councillor Allwood, I didn't mean to trying to interrupt you. I think the premise from what Clerk Van Alstyne said was just kind of my point too, is we do need to have some kind of direction out of this committee to staff, so that staff have an idea of what they report we're wanting back. And so whether it's the staff requesting a staff report on the mandatory program, the voluntary program, the locations, the years, there should be some guidelines given to staff so they can present something that I don't disagree with you, Councillor Allwood. We will need some community engagement before moving this process forward, but at least then we can get a staff report that will have more specifics so that we can have an explanation of exactly what we're going to the public with. So I think that's just kind of what staff are looking for. Mayor McQueen.
So our direction here to today was to have a further discussion on this, to look at a pilot project for Lake Eugenia and we'll go from there. And I think I did talk about in this report that it could cost up to $400 a property times 350 or 400 properties. That's $160,000. We have 5,500 homes within in Grey Highlands. You had $400 times $5,500. That's a lot of money if you make that mandatory. And that's not where I'm going. I would certainly say a pilot project around Lake Eugene, that's where we've heard the issues. I think that's what we're trying to address. And, you know, certainly voluntary for the rest, but right now I can support the idea of around Lake Eugenia as a pilot project, but that's about as far as I'll support it for today, other than voluntary. That's a big pill. And I look at Tiny Township, half of it's along Lake Eugene or Lake Georgian Bay, which I can understand the sensitivity. Lake Huron was the same way. They have along Huron, I'm trying to think, some of the municipalities there talked about 10 years ago. So, you know, I think bite size, certainly a report how we would roll out the pilot project for Eugenia Lake, I think, and educating and voluntary inspections for other parts of the municipality. I have no issue with that, but 55 homes, that's a big bill. I can't support that.
Any other comments? Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair Nielsen. I could support mandatory for the whole municipality, but I'd also be okay with mandatory for the Lake Eugenia and then voluntary, but I don't know if there'd be a lot of participation if it's voluntary. But spread over 6 or 7 years. And as far as the cost, other than the staff time to coordinate and look up records and that type of thing, I'm thinking that wouldn't it be better for the municipality to supply a list of approved inspectors? The homeowner goes out and hires the inspector and pays them, and then the inspector sends a report to the homeowner and to the municipality. Then we're not having to collect any money. We don't have staff, because what is that staff member going to do in the winter? I just think this is a cleaner way of doing it. A question, if we do set mandatory, whether it's just Eugenia or the whole municipality, and they know that, okay, Eugenia's next year and, you know, the former Artemisia is the next year, do you think people will rush out and pump their tank out because they think that'll fix any problems? And then that will take away from the information that can be gathered from an inspection. I guess I'm looking at the two experts.
I'll try to answer that as best I can. There may be some aspect of owners who would go out and have a pump out. The thing with pumping the tank is it has to be done based on when it needs to be done. There's guidelines of, 3 to 5 years is typical, but it really depends on the use and the size of the tank. So if that tank needs to be pumped out, then someone going out and doing it in advance of the inspection is still a good thing. It's still preventative maintenance. When it comes time to do an inspection of that property, you would still be able to see the tank in its functional operating condition and know that it's working. And they could just document and provide a record that they had their tank pumped out. And I think it's a good thing if it brings that awareness and people go and do that. So I don't think it's necessarily a negative if they went out and had their tank pumped, because it triggered something for them to, oh, I should do that. I haven't done that I can't remember when I last did it. Maybe I should have my tank pumped. That's a good thing. So I don't know, Mac, did you want to add anything? No? Okay.
It comes back to the homeowner knows whether the system's working okay or not. And they know when they've had it pumped. By camouflaging it when the inspector's there, really doesn't extend the life of this system. So it might help this time, it won't help the next time.
And just another comment about the public open house. I don't know whether we want to go to the public and ask them what they think or how they think we should be doing it, because we're going to get both extremes. And, you know, we've heard from the people around the lake. I think this needs to be council's decision, make a decision, then go to the public and educate them. And I think a good time to go to the public is when we're doing our town halls, just have a portion of that meeting for information. Thank you.
Those comments, Councillor Allen. Mayor McQueen, I see your hand again.
So just to wind this back, we've been back into the box. I think a big part of what drove this discussion was the concerns around Lake Eugenia and septic. So like, I don't recall a push to do like this is an issue across the municipality. It comes back to Lake Eugenia. And I think, you know, addressing Lake Eugenia with that concern, I think is something that is a good first step. You know, because we don't know what we don't know, right? But to put this on like 55 homeowners across the municipality, I don't think that's, I haven't heard that to be the issue. It's Lake Eugenia is where I've heard the issue. So I would, my focus is let's deal with Lake Eugenia. Let's try to, you know, go through and what we feel is right for that community. I mean, certainly other water bodies, I would say, you know, we have other lakes, Irish Lake and Wilcox Lake, and we have source water protection areas. Councillor Wickens mentioned the gorge. You know, there's some water bodies, you know, that, you know, focused on, I mean, what is, you know, what are we trying to address here is probably water quality and concerns around water. But, you know, I don't feel comfortable of across the whole municipality at this point, because I haven't heard that being an issue. I've heard it at Lake Eugenia. That's where I've heard the issue. So.
Well, we've heard both sides of the different way this can go. We don't have any motions on the floor. Councillor Al Allwood, sorry, was saying he was prepared to move a motion to start us off. Perhaps that's where we should start, and then we can see how that motion moves forward. Councillor Allwood.
Thank you, Chair Nielsen. I mean, I'd be prepared to move that we look for a staff report on a mandatory pilot program around Lake Eugenia. And we might as well ask for a municipal-wide voluntary program, what the implication and cost would be of that, how it could be implemented, what the recommendations are for frequency. And as you know, it could be, as Councillor Allen suggested, they may come back and say the way to do it is just educate them, let them go out and hire it, and the requirement is that we receive a report. That could be one way it works, I guess, but I don't think today that this group is going to design the program. We need staff to put that report together for us. So I would move that the mandatory pilot program around Lake Eugenia, I guess I would add source water protection areas to that mandatory program as a recommendation, and a voluntary program that could be municipal wide.
So source water, I see Clerk Van Alsten's hands up, and I think her question is going to be mine. Source water protection areas may be harder to define, but I'll go to Clerk Van Alsten.
Thank you through you, Chair Nielsen. I think there would need to be a little bit more direction on what it means around Lake Eugenia. That is very vague. I think, and the same with source water protection areas. Is it within, or is it within and around? So I think that if you look at some of the other models that are out there, they say like within 1 kilometer or something like that. I'm not suggesting anything. I just think that we need some more clarity.
Thank you for that question. If I still have the floor, Chair.
Yep.
I mean,
go ahead, Councillor.
You could ask our expert today what you know, the recommend. I mean, I think I read somewhere within 100 meters of shorelines, but what would be and source water protection areas, if we're talking mandatory, what would be the setbacks that we should give some direction to staff for if we're looking for a staff report that would make sense? Thank you.
Yeah, I could speak a little bit to the 100-meter distance. That Lake Simcoe, the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan uses that distance to define. So I think it's a good guidance to look to, that within that distance near a sensitive water body is a reasonable area to look at. I think source protection areas are a little more difficult because there's different aspects of source protection and how those are mapped. Like what is the trigger? Is it based on if the property is within a highly vulnerable aquifer area, or is it based on other wellhead protection only? Like there's different aspects of those source protection plans. So I'm not sure I have an answer to that specifically.
I speak to that. In regards to the source water protection, we actually had a situation last year where there was a failing septic system and just on the outskirts of Markdale. It's still within Markdale proper. And Carl Seidel from the source water, Grace Obel, they actually were able to review the septic. It was a replacement bed, and it will be required to be re-inspected every 5 years. So that is already built in place for those areas.
Sorry, just for clarity on that. Sorry, Councillor Elwood, just for myself. Subio Holt, you just said that, is it just that specific property that has it built in that it requires a 5-year re-inspection, or is it within the source water protection head?
I believe it's within the source water protection area, but I specifically, this one property I was speaking with and clarifying the process. So, and I tried to nail down, so who's going to be going there in 5 years? And it wasn't crystal clear to me, to be honest with you. So we have that flagged in our system, so.
Okay. And that's something that the Conservation Authority itself implemented.
It's required. That's correct.
Thank you
Because
for that.
anywhere in regards to the source water that is highly vulnerable and certain criteria for building permits as well, they also do a review of the site plans. So, and the proposal for the build.
Thank you for that.
Follow up if I may.
Councillor Elwood, yeah.
So maybe we don't need to talk about mandatory if there are systems in place that are adequately protecting that, because we all as councillors through the training we've received have a personal responsibility for those safe drinking water. So you just want to be aware of that, or just remind you of that. But, so I guess the motion would be that a mandatory pilot program around Lake Eugenia and a potential voluntary program that's municipal wide. A staff report requesting that, how that could be implemented.
Are you going with 100 meters around Lake Eugenia?
I would use that 100-meter, yeah, as recommended.
Okay. Sorry, Clerk Van Alstyne?
Just clarity, only Lake Eugenia, no other lakes?
As a pilot project, yes, only Lake Eugenia.
Okay, and I'm just looking to get the motion clarified so we can see if we have a seconder before I get any questions or comments. So, Clerk Van Alstyne, is that motion captured? Okay, so I'm looking for a seconder, and Councillor Wickens, is that you seconding?
I would like to add to that motion to look into public education programs.
That will be part of
it or something like that.
Okay with you, Councillor Allwood?
I'm assuming that the steps that were laid out in the information we received today would be part of that. So the public education is a huge part of it. So, but again, I would still look for that detail in the staff report rather than. I'm not sure that we need to add that to the motion, but if the clerk feels it is necessary, I'm okay with it. It can't be done.
Public education will be more generic and go to the whole municipality, whereas the pilot project itself, the motion is specifically saying Lake Eugenia.
And municipal wide voluntary program, so it would go to all of our residents that have septic systems.
Okay. So I have a mover and I have a seconder. Clerk Van Alstyne. Clarity?
Yes, thank you through you, Chair Nielsen. I think there's two different education components that we're speaking of, and I think that it's important that we hash out both of them. I think the first part is right now, tomorrow, we can start an education program on septic tank maintenance. It doesn't matter where you live in the municipality. I think we can get that information out. We can use our website, our social media pages, our what's happening, all those things to try and get information out to the public. That is something that I think you could give direction on today. I think additionally, once the program comes back with some guidelines and exactly how the program is going to work, we're going to have another portion of public education, which is, hey, this is a new program we have in place. This is what you have to do if you live here, and this is what you could do if you live everywhere else in the municipality. That might include an open house, but that also will include information on our website and social media posts. That's not going to come till much further down the road. So I think if we want education out there now, then we would need to move that motion now on septic maintenance. And then I think the program will have a separate education component.
So Councillor Allwood and Councillor Wickens are the mover and the seconder. Are we looking for education now? Councillor Allwood.
I mean, there exists on our website right now, septic information, which is part of the education process. So how a septic system works, decommissioning your system, finding a septic professional, guide for operating and maintaining your system, home owner's guide to a healthy septic, that's there now. There are also brochures, some of which used to be on the table in our lobby that are available to anybody that walks into the municipal offices. That Karen's probably got one with her today. Well, it was a bigger one that I saw. It was an 8x11 one that was, or yeah, maybe that may be I thought I had a booklet at some point, you know. Yeah, so we do have some educational material in the system as we speak. That's kind of general stuff. I mean, the education around a mandatory system is a different, you know, I agree with the clerk, but.
So then Councillor Allwood seems to be just moving specifically the motion around the mandatory and voluntary inspection program. If somebody wants to move a secondary recommendation after this one, then we can move forward with that. So we'll stick with the motion for clarity is just on a mandatory staff report to come back on a mandatory inspection program around Lake Eugenia and a voluntary inspection program for the rest of the municipality. And I have a mover and a seconder. So comments and questions on that motion. Councillor Dubyk.
Thank you. So when we think about our program, I'm also wondering if we have to think about just beyond what we think is a pilot. And so to me, what that triggers is protecting all our waterfront. So it's not just Lake Eugenia. You know, we do have other lakes in our municipality. And so wondering if the motion should then also be including, you know, what that would look like, say, for 100 meters setback from all our waterways. So that would be Lake Eugenia, Brewster's, Wilcox, Irish. I'm not sure if I'm missing anything else.
Rivers and
so there's more, right? Like there's many, and I think the reason for this is, you know, while Lake Eugenia is the critical issue right now because we're seeing the blooms, we don't want that to happen to our other lakes. And so this is a preventative measure, not just a, you know, once concern happens and sort of this buildup over time of nitrates, phosphates, et cetera, happens in our lakes, but we want to help to prevent that. And so just wondering if, you know, if that would be part of the motion, because, and this is the bigger question of, you know, what's the intent of this program? Is it just, you know, Lake Eugenia, or is it all our lakefronts and waterfronts? And I believe it would be all our waterfronts. And so I'll just put it out there.
Councillor Allwood.
thank you, Chair Nielsen, through you. I mean, I think part of what's going to come back in the first phase that was in Ann's report is a permit record review. We need to know what we know, where the systems are within the municipality, where they are in relation to sensitive waterways. I'm assuming the Lake Management Task Force, when it specifically for lakes, but would have some recommendations moving forward. But the pilot project is a pilot project that could be applied to all of our sensitive lakes and rivers at some point, if that's once we see how effective it is. I'm not sure that we need to go beyond I mean, my motion doesn't go beyond the pilot project. But it would give us an idea of how a mandatory system works, what the costs are, what the cost of the homeowners are.
A question just before I go to Councillor Dubyk, a question to maybe CBO Holt. If we put in the wording here as a pilot project, does staff have the information needed? And if this carries forward, to me, a pilot project is a test sampling. But if we're doing a septic reinspection, do we need the one-time inspection of going through? Would the pilot project continue to do a secondary inspection after X number of years to come back? I'm just wondering if pilot gives enough information, or is it more that the inspection program would be implemented and then there'd be a report coming back to council of the day to get kind of the results of that inspection program?
I think that makes a lot of sense in regards to having the pilot project, having it come back to this, to council to do a review. And because even when we're talking about what we're going to exempt, if we're going to exempt something that's earlier than 5 years old, if you think about it, if they're not picked up on this round of inspections, and if you are going forward with a inspection every 5 years, the first time they would be captured would be 10 years. So we want to make sure we take that into consideration as well.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Dubyk, I saw your hand raised. And then I have Mayor McQueen.
Yeah, I think I'm just kind of getting a little, maybe, I would like maybe a little bit of clarity. I don't know, maybe if this is from our clerk. Because when a staff report comes back, for a pilot project, I'm just wondering, if it's helpful to have, as we look forward, is the intent really, this goes back to intent of the program, right? Do we want to just focus on Lake Eugenia? Or, do we want the program to focus on lakefront properties? And so I keep going back to this because I think that's an important distinction for us to make right now in terms of, as information comes back. We can still start with Lake Eugenia because, again, that's the critical area where we need focus right away, and, would it still be helpful to receive information back in terms of, in terms of the staff report, what does that mean? And, from having as we think out beyond the initial pilot, what does 100 meters, from our lake fronts mean? And would that information be helpful right now along with and we're starting with the pilot. So that's where I'm landing right now.
Thank you, Councillor Dubyk. Mayor McQueen, I'm going to go to you for comments on the motion that's on the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Coming today was talking about a pilot project around Lake Eugenia, and that's sort of, I think, a good step. But it's not stopped saying that in the report, it could come back that a phase 2 approach would include other lakes. I think let's get back to get that into the report. I mean, focus on a pilot project. I mean, there's a lot of information today, whatever from public viewing us and stuff. But I think moving forward with a pilot project with Lake Eugenia, I think is the intent of this body. But we get that report back that, we could expand on year 2 or year 3. We could do all the water bodies or all those, and it could be in the report identified what we would be going after, like what rivers, whatever. But I think that's got to come back in the report. Thank you.
Thanks. I was going to go to Councillor Wickens, but he
Just before I finish, a few discussions back, it talked about source water protection. I know on the source water protection area, there has to be a plan if you're in your affected property. I do have a source water protection committee meeting on Friday. I can ask some clarity because I do sit on that body now at Grace Sobel, so I can ask some clarity around that part, around that. But I just wanted catch that before that conversation is a long way down the road.
Thank you, Mayor McQueen. Councillor Alwood.
Thank you, Chair Nielsen, for you, just to address Councillor Dubyk's concerns. I mean, the intent of a pilot project would be to test the feasibility of extending it to all of our lakefronts. You know, I'm assuming that the lake water management task force would also have some recommendations, like maybe you can, here's a pilot project that we're thinking of implementing on Lake Eugenia. The recommendation of that task force could be that, given that could be extended to all of our, I mean, we're not just talking about Lake Eugenia, but we're implementing it because it's been brought to our attention by the residents that something needs to be done. And I think it's a great area to start the work, understand how the project works. And I think eventually that we'll have this for all of our critical lakes and rivers and cold water streams, or whatever the right terminology is, but it would be extended beyond a pilot project at some point. But the pilot project gives us an opportunity to understand the costs and how the system works, develop best practices, and then push it out into the wider areas, if that's the will of council at the time.
Clerk Van Alstyne, I see you have a question.
I just wanted to provide a little bit of guidance to council on this. We keep talking about a pilot program, and I think that's the wrong terminology to use in this case. I think we should talk about a phased-in program, and whether we choose to go to phase 2 in the future or not will be up to council of the day. You talk about a pilot program that's mandatory. You're not going to get a lot of buy-in from the public. And this is something that eventually, when it comes back to council, whenever the program is developed, you're going to be passing a bylaw on this as some sort of rotational basis. And so you talk about a pilot, oh, well, I'm not really going to buy in this time, and I'm going to, push my heels in kind of thing, because maybe they'll just can it after a year. A pilot program to me sounds like it's an experimental program. So I agree with maybe starting phase 1 being Lake Eugenia, and phase 2 maybe being other shorelines, and phase 3 maybe being, broader than that. But I think we have to watch the terminology that we're using when we're talking about the program.
Thank you for that, Clerk Van Alstyne. I think that was similar to my earlier question or comment to Councillor Dubyk, who was saying, all of Grey Highlands, it's that phase-in approach. You're going to take, our first year of this program may only be able to accomplish Lake Eugenia with the number of properties that exist there, where the properties are located. We've heard it said a couple of times, the inspections aren't happening all winter long when the snow's there. Inspections are going to be happening during, the late spring up to maybe early fall. And so there's a smaller window. So it's going to take time to get through the entirety of the municipality. Councillor Dubyk.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate the clerk's point about language. I think that is very important. And as I think about sort of our ask as well, I'd like to move an amendment to extend it also to all lakefronts. Because as a phased approach, we start with Lake Eugenia, and then it extends to, but then if we include all the lakefronts, then we'll see the phases come through. So I will move to extend to all lakefronts and see if there's any support for that.
Okay. Do I have a seconder? So the current motion reads that the Committee of the Whole receive the septic and reinspection program presentation for information, and that the committee recommend that council direct staff to draft a mandatory reinspection program for all properties within 100 meters of Lake Eugenia shoreline, and a voluntary reinspection program for the remainder of the properties in Grey Highlands, including staffing requirements, costs of the program, and options for cost recovery. The amendment would add that the mandatory reinspection program for all properties within 100 meters of lakefronts of any lake within Grey Highlands, I think would be kind of to capture Councillor Dubyk's comments. And I'm seeing
Yes,
a
thank
hand.
you.
Okay, so the amendment that's being moved and seconded by Councillor Allen, I think I saw his hand raised, is to amend to not be specific to Lake Eugenia, but to be all lakefronts within Grey Highlands. So the amendment is on the floor. Questions or comments regarding the amendment only, please? Mayor McQueen.
So that motion seems to change from what I remember what was put on the table. And going back to pilot project, I looked up the part of what a pilot project, a small scale preliminary experiment or test designed to assess the feasibility, effectiveness, and the potential outcome of a larger project before full scale implementation. I sort of disagree with taking the word pilot project out because it's a test of the waters before you move forward. But I think that original motion has changed from what it originally was worded, because I thought we were focusing on the Lake Eugenia as a pilot project. And I think the intent of the motion has changed. So I just raised that point.
To you, Mayor McQueen, Councillor Alwood repeatedly said it was with also respect to all of Grey Highlands as a voluntary septic reinspection for all the rest of Grey Highlands. But yes, the word pilot is not currently in the motion. And if Councillor Alwood disagrees with that, then we'll make sure that that is captured as part of his original motion. But we're Councillor Alwood.
So, I mean, I believe the amendment's now talking about phases, right? We're talking about Lake Eugenia being phase one of a phase project that would eventually take into account all of the lakes. You're not mentioning rivers at this point in time, but so my intent with the original motion, I did say pilot project several times, was as in 4.1 on the agenda that specifically mentions pilot project. That was what we were looking for education on today. We certainly received that. You know, I guess by talking about phase one and phase two at this point, you're sort of assuming the outcome of the pilot project is going to be something we can push out. But I believe a pilot project would, as the mayor just read out the definition, would give us a little more education before we do that, I guess. I'm not totally opposed to the amendment, but I'm unsure why pilot project doesn't capture it. I don't share the clerk's concerns if pilot is interpreted the way the mayor's definition just was read. Thank you.
So to that, then, Clerk Van Alstyne, Councillor Alwood was trying to be clear in the crafting of his motion for regarding pilot. So then the motion would read that the committee will recommend that council direct staff to draft a pilot mandatory septic reinspection program for all properties within 100 meters of Lake Eugenia shoreline, and a pilot voluntary septic reinspection program for the remainder of the properties within Grey Highlands, including staffing requirements, cost of the program, and options for cost recovery. That would be the way I would then word the motion. And then the amendment is specifically that council recommend that council direct staff to draft a pilot mandatory septic reinspection program for all properties within 100 meters of lakefronts in Grey Highlands, and changing Lake Eugenia to lakefront. And I'll just get clarity from Councillor Dubyk. Councillor Dubyk?
Thank you. And I think, so just on this conversation, I guess the reason why I found the clerk's point about, maybe taking the word pilot project out and kind of talk more about phases and talk about all lakefronts is, I do think about sort of where we're at in our term as well. And making sure that, this will take time to, to create, design, implement, etc. And in terms of our motion, I think I do want to ensure that we don't lose our intent of wanting, of the fact that we see this, as a firm we see this as a best practice that we want to implement. And I think that's why maybe I'm starting to step away from the word pilot. I'm good with whatever council decides, but this is a best practice. You know, we've heard it, you know, from our residents. I've heard it from various conservation authorities that this is something, you know, that, you know, you do, this is just the best practice you kind of want to move forward with. And given the fact that, you know, we have like a year and a half left in our term, you know, I think making it very clear in terms of the intent of this motion and this program is important. So thank you.
Okay. Specifically, we are discussing the amendments. That was a little extra, but that's okay. Councillor Lohead.
Sure, thank you. So in regards to the amendment and the is lakefront, is that the wording?
All lakes.
All lakes. I mean, what I've been thinking about here is that Lake Eugenia is an artificial lake, and it is in fact the Beaver River, right? And so it seems to me slightly arbitrary to just define all lakes when really, you know, anything that happens upstream, especially of Lake Eugenia, is essentially an input to Lake Eugenia itself. So I wonder then if this should be extended to, you know, all waterfronts along the the Beaver River, either upstream of Lake Eugenia or anywhere. And I mean, this is, you know, this is a sensitive watershed. So that's my thinking here is that if we're talking about focusing on our particularly sensitive or urgent areas, that those riverfront properties should probably be captured as well.
There you go. Thank you for those comments, Councillor Lohead. Mayor McQueen.
So the word pilot maybe not necessarily just only speaks to expanding the program, but it maybe also speaks to the financial implications to this municipality. We're just under a 10% increase this year for our budget. And it does talk in here ranges between $100 and $350, cost of $350 to $400 per inspection should be anticipated. So just, you know, throwing out $150,000. So pilot, I think, also pertains to our cost and expanding with this amendment. I don't know how many properties that's going to include, but if it jumped from 400 to say 1,200.
Sorry, I'm just going to interrupt you for a second. The amendment on the floor is just whether or not we're going to all lakes, lakefronts, or all lakes within New Grey Highlands. So if you can just keep your comments to that, and then any comments you have on the word pilot or something we can do after the amendment has passed or failed.
Well, I'm speaking to the amendment that it's being expanded to what our original motion was talking about was the properties around Lake Eugenia. And you know, the point of expanding and going back to the report that was presented to us today as the cost. So with this amendment is going to change the cost from that report. So are we receiving a report, or is this moving forward with making this happen? I'm sort of a little confused now.
The motion itself is to get a staff report with a bit more specifics as to what will move forward. So the amendment would be to move forward with a mandatory septic reinspection, pilot mandatory septic reinspection program for all lake front properties within Grey Highlands, and then a voluntary septic reinspection program for the rest of Grey Highlands. So when we get this staff report back, it should have a bit more specifics on the program itself, how it can be implemented, what the cost of the program will be, and options for the cost recovery. That's what we are directing to go towards council and then be resolved at council to go to staff.
So clarity that report will come back with the cost of all those properties within the a watershed, or however it's being amended.
Yes, theoretically, the report would come back with the full costing of trying to implement this motion. Councillor Allen.
Thank you. There was a comment a few minutes ago that this amendment is a phased-in approach to the lakefronts, but the motion, the way it's written, isn't saying that. The initial phase would be all lakefronts. Okay.
That's the understanding I took from Councillor Dubyk. Now, keeping that in mind, and my understanding would be we could likely not get all lakefronts inspected in the first year of this program. It would carry through the time it takes to do that first round of inspections on all lakefront properties, given the number
Well,
that exist.
Well, we could if the residents hire their own inspectors.
Yep, fair
It's
point.
simple. It's simple, and to go to Mayor McQueen's comment, there's no cost to the municipality for the inspections. He keeps referencing the $350 to $400, but if the resident is paying that, it's of no cost to us other than admin work.
Fair point, Councillor. Any other questions or comments on the amendment to the motion, which is specifically to increase from Lake Eugenia to all lakes within Greyhounds? I think Councillor Lowhead, I do see your hand.
Thank you, Chair Nielsen. So I guess back to my original point about all waterfront, perhaps. I don't know if that's too broad. I mean, because we have properties along a lot of smaller creeks and perhaps sensitive wetlands and whatever. But I'm wondering if it is maybe the more appropriate word to use, and if we were to say all waterfront properties, if that could be understood by staff appropriately. I realize that we're potentially getting into some specious territory here, but I also think, if it is probably the right way to focus our attention is on the most important waterfront properties, which be Beaver River, Lake Eugenia, other lakefronts, and then move outwards from there. I guess maybe that's a question for staff, if waterfront could be captured, in a discrete way.
Perhaps CBO Holt.
So we did work with the Grey County GIS, and we were able to pick to pull out from 100 meters from all the water from all the lakes. I'm sure that's something that could happen. I have not explored that, I'll be honest with you, because I was kind of waiting to see where we're at from here and then put our time and energies into that specific. So we certainly can investigate that. And I would think that could probably happen fairly easily, I would think.
So perhaps just a question to Councillor Lowhead and maybe to the rest of council. With the way this motion is worded and moving forward on a pilot program, and whether or not we're going to do a phased in approach, is it necessary to have what you're describing, Councillor Lowhead, as part of this one? Or would that be once this pilot project has gone forward and then the council of the day gets to report back and then possibly expands the scope of the quote unquote mandatory portion of this program? Councillor Lowhead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Nielsen. It's a great question, and perhaps that could be the second phase. I guess what I'm hung up on here is, again, the fact that that Lake Eugenia is the Beaver River, and so it seems a relatively arbitrary distinction to say, lakefront here, and then not if you're especially upstream, that they wouldn't be captured in this part of the project. But it would, if this is a phased-in program, then it would be coming soon, and so I'm not really too fussed about this, but it just seemed to me worth saying is all.
Fair point. Councillor Dubyk.
Thank you. And point taken, in terms of maybe there's something after sort of this initial one too, because I think that's why, when you go mandatory everywhere, you capture everything. But totally appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. I think we've had enough discussion on the amendment itself, so we'll call the question. All those in favor of the amendment to change it from specifically Lake Eugenia to all lakes within Grey Highlands? All those in favor? Opposed? And I will call that carried. So moving on to the main motion as amended. Any other questions, comments, or amendments? I'm not seeing. Oh, Councillor Alwood.
For clarity, can we just have the main motion as amended read back before we call the vote, Chair? Thank you.
That's a great question and comment, and I was about to ask that myself. So Clerk Van Alstyne, if you didn't mind doing the honors.
Thank you, through you, Chair Nielsen. The main motion as amended is that the Committee of the Whole receive the Septic Reinspection Program presentation for information, and that the committee recommend that Council direct staff to draft a pilot project on mandatory septic reinspection program for all properties within 100 meters of all lakes, all lake shorelines, and a pilot project a voluntary pilot project for septic reinspection program for the remainder of the properties in Grey Highlands, including staffing requirements, costs of the program, and options for cost recovery.
Is everybody clear on that? I believe we are. Mayor McQueen.
So the intention of this motion is not to come back with a report with options. The main part of this motion is to come back with a policy moving forward.
Yes, that this gives directions for staff to come back with a report showing how the program would work, including staffing needed, costs of the program, and options for cost recovery. And I think to that end, Councillor Allen has made a couple of comments about the options for residents to find and hire and obtain their own inspector, and that could be part of what comes forward as options within this program. Councillor Alwood.
Thank you, Chair Nielsen. Through you, I was just going to basically say the same thing to address the mayor and Councillor Allen's concerns. The report could have options for us for sure. I would assume there would be some choices to be made, but thank you.
Mayor McQueen.
The only part is from the report, and I'm only saying this from what the report says, is by the municipality doing it, we're in control of the inspection. Leaving it to the property owner to find is if that property owner doesn't do it, then there has to be fines or fees or something, because they may say, I can't find anybody, who do I get? I'm not doing it, I don't know. But when we're doing it, it goes to the property, we're doing it. But I just think that and I don't know if there are municipalities that offer the program that Councillor Allen is suggesting. I think that if it does, then it needs to have some of that reference to the other municipalities that are doing that program.
Thank you for those comments. I think staff are hearing everything and will come back with the options in the report. Councillor Alwood.
One last comment then. I mean, it would be just as easy for staff could say, here's a list of certified inspectors that you pick one and give us a report. If that was the direction we went, you would have to have some sort of, if the direction was as Councillor Allen was talking, that's, again, I'm putting stuff in a report that we haven't seen yet, but that could be an option. And there are ways to deal with it. Thank you.
Okay, I think we've had great discussion on this motion. I will call the motion. All those in favor of the motion that's on the floor? And opposed? That motion is carried. Are there any subsequent motions from this committee of the whole to council? I don't. Councillor Dubyk.
Thank you. So it's not a motion, but maybe just an ask about, we've talked about the source protection area and how the source protection, I guess, association or group is implementing reinspection, have some sort of a reinspection program. Yeah, so I think that information coming back to council would be very helpful, because then if we can better understand sort of what they're doing and anything else around that would be helpful to us. Thank you.
Clerk Van Alstyne, do we need to capture that as a motion to get a staff report back on source water protection reinspection programs?
Sorry, through you, Chair Nielsen, if the request is a staff report back on that, then I would suggest yes, that we would need a motion on that.
Councillor Dubyk.
I'm wondering if it's a motion or if it's something like, if there's something that's prepared. Well, it would be prepared by the source. It's already there, so I'm assuming if it's just something that can be forwarded to us in terms of a document.
Then perhaps Mayor McQueen.
So I'm going to go back maybe 10 years ago. This was a mandatory thing that if you're in a source protection area, you must do X, Y, Z, B, whatever. And I remember that they did have some funding for people that had septics in those source water protections to get, they had funding opportunity to switch over, like for example here in Markdale, to switch over to our septic or sewage and hookups, right? They had that, and I remember staff went around and put those information things on people's doors. I don't know, but I think, as I understand, that if you are in a source water protection area, you must have a source water protection plan. Whether you have an oil tank, whether you have like anything that's vulnerable to that source water protection area. And I would think if you had a septic in that area, you'd have to list that as well. So I can get clarity on that. I don't know, I'm looking at Karen if she has any information, but I know, you know, when this whole thing was rolled out, if you're in that area, you must do X, Y, Z. And if one of those things is a septic, which they probably, that was the whole idea, is getting people off septic if you're in a source water protection area, but I can follow up with, because this will be my third meeting now being on that committee, so I sort of learning as I go along as well. But I'm pretty sure that sort of got addressed 10 years ago, maybe now, or maybe less, but there would be, if you're in that source water protection area, there's many requirements.
Councillor Dubyk, sounds like perhaps a request for a staff report might be beneficial, if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, yeah, and not asking for staff to do a lot of work, but you know, if there's any existing documents, just to make sure that council gets them so that we understand sort of what is happening within our boundaries and how that may, you know, we may get ideas in terms of, you know, what they're doing, and or just so that we understand what's happening within our own municipal boundaries. Thank you.
So are you officially moving that, Councillor Dubyk?
I will officially move that.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Allwood by the looks of it. Any questions or comments on that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, that is carried. Any other motion? Councillor Allen.
Motion to adjourn.
Councillor Allen's moving us to section 5 of the committee meeting. Motion to adjourn, seconded by Councillor Allwood. All those in favor? That is carried. We are adjourned at 12:02 p.m. Thank you, everyone, for your comments and questions and patience. Have a